The NHL season has come to an end and your 2019 Stanley Cup champions are the St. Louis Blues. In today's video, we're going to recap Game 7 and take a quick look here at the Blues playoff run. We'll get into all that coming up next. Welcome back to Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams. So if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So last night we had Game 7 for the Stanley Cup on the line with the St. Louis Blues and the Boston Bruins doing battle at TD Garden in Boston. Obviously things got off to a pretty good start for the Blues. The first couple shifts were okay, but then the Boston Bruins took over and things were not looking good early on for St. Louis. Goaltender Jordan Binnington had to make numerous saves, and the St. Louis Blues found themselves going an extended period of time without even getting a shot on net. Then around the 8-minute mark, we saw Colton Parayko take the only penalty of the game, which the referees had to call, where he shot the puck out over the glass in his own end. So a delay of game penalty it was. That Boston Bruins power play, which has been lethal, and what I discussed in the preview video, outlining that the Blues really could not afford to give the Bruins any chances, or it could be the difference here in the game. Managed to kill it off. The Bruins got some good looks though, and Binnington had to come up huge as their best penalty killer on multiple occasions. But they survived the penalty kill and survived more of the onslaught here towards the end of the period. Then something we see many times in hockey, we see a team putting a lot of pressure on, getting chance after chance, being stonewalled by the goalie, only to see it go back the other way and have the St. Louis Blues capitalize on an opportunity at the other end. Jay Bouwmeester takes a shot from the point, redirected by Ryan O'Reilly, and they've got the first goal of the game. Automatically, that gives them a major edge, as we discussed in the preview. 70% of Game 7 Stanley Cup Final games were won by the team that scored the first goal. So that was absolutely huge for the Blues, especially after the onslaught from the Bruins, that they managed to survive, and they can see themselves going into the intermission here with potentially a lead of at least one goal. But that wasn't all the Blues managed to get. They managed to get a little bit of momentum out of that goal. And then with only seconds left in the first period, a really horrible change by Boston Bruins forward Brad Marchand led to Alex Pietrangelo adding a second goal with only 8 seconds left, giving the Blues a 2-0 lead heading into the break. I'm sure this gave them a lot of confidence. They managed to get all the nervous energy out of their system here early on. They were starting to look like a more confident team, even though the shots on goal were tilted in Boston's favor. Jordan Binnington certainly came up huge when he needed to and gave the team a chance to win. Now, as we discussed in the preview, Binnington had to match at least Tuukka Rask, if not outperform him, for the Blues to really have a shot to win here. And even though Tuukka Rask let in 2 goals, I don't really know if you could really fault him on either one, and there wasn't a whole lot of shots going at him. So unfortunately, those were opportunities where he would have needed to make a huge save to keep his team in it. But like I said, I'm not sure based on the shots that you can really fault him. But either way, Binnington was stealing the show here after 20 minutes. Now coming out for the second period, as things were still kind of tilted in favor of Boston as far as possession and shots go, but the Blues were starting to smother them defensively. Binnington continued to play big. There were no penalties at all in the second period, but the Blues were not able to generate a whole lot of offense themselves. They were badly outshot here yet again, but still, the Boston Bruins could not buy a goal. They had a lot of opportunities where passes just were not being picked up. We saw Pasternak miss a few opportunities for a one-timer. The puck was bouncing a lot. You could tell the ice wasn't great, but at the same time, both teams are playing on that ice, so you can't really blame that on Boston's side. But they continued to dominate the possession game, but just couldn't really generate a whole lot. And when they did, Binnington made a huge save to keep them out of it. Heading into the third period now, of course, the St. Louis Blues are seeing themselves 20 minutes away from winning the Stanley Cup. They continued on with that smothering type defense. The Bruins were still getting some opportunities, but it was a little bit more even keel. That period was more even for the shots on goal. But halfway through, Braden Shen scores a huge goal for the Blues to put them up 3-0. And at that point, it's pretty well over. Although you can never count this Bruins team out. When you have Brad Marchand, Patrice Bergeron, Zdeno Chara, Pasternak, Rask, these guys know how to win. We've seen them come back time and time again, especially in big-time games, big-time moments. So you can't count them out at all. But the Blues continued to put the pressure on. And then we saw Zach Sanford add a 4th goal for the St. Louis Blues, which was basically the dagger in the hearts of the Bruins. You knew at that point, with less than 5 minutes to go, down 4 goals, that it more than likely at that point is all sealed up. It's over. It wasn't long after that when Bruce Cassidy pulled Tuukka Rask They tried to play with the goalie out and play desperate hockey to try to get caught up. They managed to get one, which was a nice goal from defenseman Matt Grzelcyk, but that's all they could muster up, and the St. Louis Blues went on to win the game by a 4-1 score. The Bruins spoiled the shutout, but I don't think the Blues or Binnington really care at that point because they're now 2019 Stanley Cup champions. So they played yet another amazing road game, even though the first period the ice was tilted. The Bruins put the pressure on, but they survived it. They took advantage of their opportunities. Binnington was huge, and all the keys to the game that we discussed in the preview that had to go the way of the Blues was exactly just how everything went down. I indicated I didn't expect to see hardly any penalties, and outside of the one that they had to call, which for the puck over the glass, there was no other infractions called by the referees. And for the most part, I thought it was a relatively clean game. There's probably were a few infractions on either side that could have been called, but nothing serious. The referees were a non-story here again in Game 7 like they were in Game 6, which was nice to see after all the bad calls and non-calls we've seen throughout those playoffs. And the referees being a way bigger story than they need to be, it was nice to see things end with them not even realizing they're there and being a non-factor and not really screwing anything up here to tilt the ice in one direction or the other. So that I was very pleased with. Of course, after the game, Ryan O'Reilly is awarded the Conn Smythe Trophy winner for playoffs MVP, which was excellent for him. I do think he's a deserving candidate. Heading into this, I kind of half wondered if Tuukka Rask very well might win it, regardless if the Bruins win the Cup or not. I do think it's probably possible that he did get some votes and certainly had some consideration, but obviously that final game probably did play a role for sure. But Ryan O'Reilly scored here yet again. He ended up being tied for most points in the playoffs, which was certainly great offensive output from him. Even though he did go long stretches of time without scoring, he was putting up assists, playing solid two-way game, and certainly had an excellent playoff season. But one thing that he accomplished was the first player since Wayne Gretzky to do it back in the 80s. He scored in 4 consecutive Stanley Cup final games in games 4, 5, 6, and 7 when it mattered most. Scored some huge goals, scored 5 goals over that span, and it was absolutely huge for the St. Louis Blues. So I dare say that trade that they made with the Buffalo Sabres last offseason to acquire him is looking even better now. As I've discussed in other videos from the Sabres side, with the fact that some of those players haven't really worked out over there, and now you've got O'Reilly being a Selke nominee and a Stanley Cup champion and a Conn Smythe Trophy winner, just goes to show that that was a terrible deal for Buffalo, and St. Louis really kind of stole him away and got an X factor here, which put them over the top to help them win. Along the way here, defenseman and captain Alex Pietrangelo also set a team record for most assists in a playoff season with 16 as well. He was also huge, and I would imagine was likely one of the runners-up for the Conn Smythe Trophy winner. I'm sure Jordan Binnington had some consideration as well, even though his numbers overall for the entire playoffs were not, absolutely phenomenal because there were some games in there that weren't great. He did come up big when it mattered most, and if it was strictly based on the finals, like the NBA does, I think it might have been more consideration. But either way, O'Reilly was certainly more than deserving for the Conn Smythe, but it could have gone a couple of different ways there. But at the end of the day, I'm sure many of the Blues players don't really care too much about that because they are now the Stanley Cup champions. Obviously, there was a lot of great moments seeing them celebrate on the ice. They brought Layla Anderson with them from St. Louis to Boston for the game. That little girl's been through a lot. It was nice to see her on the ice celebrating with the team, hoisting the Stanley Cup. There's certainly a great gesture on the Blues part to have her at so many games and even take her on the road recently. So that's yet another great story to go along with this team, who was dead last in the NHL back in January. They went from worst to first in a 6-month span. One of the most incredible stories in all of sports history. This has got to be, there's not too many times you can say that you've seen teams go from worst to first in one season. Of course, Craig Berube is the interim head coach, which I think is pretty safe to say that interim tag will be removed here in short order. Certainly goes down as one of the other big stories in this playoffs as well. We've seen a number of occasions in NHL history where a coach has taken over mid-season and led his team to the Stanley Cup. It hasn't happened a whole bunch of times, but it's happened a few times lately. We've seen it happen with the Penguins on 2 different occasions when they've won 2 of their 3 cups here in the past decade as well. So it's certainly something that's a great accomplishment. I'd have no doubt that St. Louis Blues will be making him their permanent head coach and giving him a fairly long contract extension and a big raise, because it's certainly earned it for sure. Coming into this season, I pegged the St. Louis Blues to have an excellent year and certainly be a Stanley Cup contender, but the way things started and leading into the halfway point of the season around Christmas time, I certainly thought my predictions were going to be way, way, way off. I mean, I didn't predict them to win the Stanley Cup, but I certainly predicted them to be one of the top teams in the Western Conference and to be a contender and a team who should go deep in the Western Conference playoffs and at least have a shot at being one of the teams that could fight for the cup here near the end. I didn't think they would be as good as they turned out to be, and especially the way things were looking, they certainly by all means exceeded my expectations even early on before things got bad, before they got turned around here. So congratulations to the St. Louis Blues, your 2019 Stanley Cup champions. Of course, as always, I want to hear your thoughts and opinions on Game 7 down below here in the comment section. Might not have ended in dramatic fashion like many people like to see sometimes in sports, but I thought it was an overall great series. It was a great game. We were treated to 7 games, and now we get the chance to look forward to what might happen next season. If you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, subscribe for more content just like this one. All kinds more videos coming up regarding NHL trade rumors, free agent rumors, get the draft coming up. There's all kinds of great content coming up. There will still be daily videos posted all through the entire offseason, so stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.